Evening Edition on Times Radio.
The race to the White House.
As I was saying,
this is our time, America.
On Times Radio.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats of the people that live there.
Do we believe in the promise of America? And are we willing to fight for it?
The race to the White House on Times Radio.
It is indeed our bi-weekly, twice weekly edition of the US Election Watchers here on the Evening Edition. Less than 3 weeks away now, the US election. We'll get you across all the latest twists and turns with our US Election Watchers board meeting. So this is every Monday and Thursday at 7:30, right up until the big day here on the show. This evening, really pleased to say that we are joined by Steve Harmon, Chief National Correspondent, former White House Bureau Chief of Voice of America. Good evening to you, Steve.
Good evening.
Thanks for being with us. Bobby Eberle is with us, a Republican strategist and chairman of the Fort Bend County Republican Party in Texas. Good evening, Bobby.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
And Joanna Maska is with us as well, former White House aide to President Barack Obama. Joanna, good evening.
Great to see you.
Thanks so much for being with us. We are going to respond to that big story from Gaza, and that is the death of Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas and the man who oversaw the October 7 terror attacks. He masterminded them. He, of course, has been killed. It was announced, confirmed just in the last couple of hours. Israel Katz, the foreign minister, made the announcement after DNA tests were carried out on his body. In the last few minutes, we've heard from the Vice President Kamala Harris, who gave her response to the killing.
To any terrorist who kills Americans, threatens the American people, or threatens our troops or our interests, know this: we will always bring you to justice. Israel has a right to defend itself, and the threat Hamas poses to Israel must be eliminated. Today, there is clear progress toward that goal. Hamas is decimated, and its leadership is eliminated. This moment gives us an opportunity to finally end the war in Gaza. And it must end such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination. And it is time for the day after to begin, without Hamas in power. We will not give up on these goals, and I will always work to create a future of peace, dignity, and security for all. I thank you all.
So an opportunity to end the war in Gaza, and she'll say that pointedly because this presumably is an opportunity for Joe Biden, although funnily enough we didn't hear from Joe Biden, we heard from Kamala Harris. Maybe we dig into that as well. But it is an opportunity, is it not, for Joe Biden to cement his legacy as US president. If he was to be a major broker in a deal that saw Hamas surrender, Israeli hostages released, and an end to the war in Gaza. Let's go to you first of all, Bobby Eberle.
I appreciated some of her comments, but as far as a lasting legacy for Joe Biden, please keep in mind that we've got 5 Americans that are still held hostage there, and no plan has been announced. No operations have been set forward to get them out. In fact, no one ever talks about them. So I don't think in these closing days, regardless of what happens in Israel and Palestine situation, that it's going to reflect well on the Biden-Harris administration at all. I mean, this has been tragic to see what has happened. It's great that this Hamas leader was killed, and hopefully we can move a path forward. But as long as any remnants of Hamas exists, I think a lasting peace is going to be hard to find.
Do you agree with that, Joanna Maska, that Joe Biden, doesn't have a chance to cement his legacy here? I mean, he could really ramp up the pressure, use his international influence. In fact, we heard today from Israel that they have appealed to their allies to kind of get this deal over the line. Do you think Joe Biden's capable of doing that?
Joe Biden's legacy will be handing the torch to Kamala Harris to a new generation of leadership. And I think it's right that Kamala Harris should call out Hamas as a terrorist organization.
That's not much of a legacy, though, is it, Joanna? If all he's doing is just handing over.
It's a significant legacy, actually, because we're not seeing the same of Donald Trump, who wants to hold power forever. And look, I think when it comes to Israel, Democrats are kind of in a sticky situation because Bibi Netanyahu did not protect his people. That is why, he's a guy who talks about walls and talks a good game. And there was a terrorist attack on his soil. He now has been dealing with that. It is a fantastic thing to see Hamas, their leadership destroyed. But Bibi Netanyahu is on thin ice, even with his own voters in Israel. So I think, given that he has pushed for anti-democratic reforms, I would like to see Bibi Netanyahu step aside and a new leadership in Israel. That would be a fantastic legacy for Israelis, for Palestinians. I'd like to see Joe Biden have some involvement in that, but ultimately, this is the Israelis who, at the point where Bibi Netanyahu did not protect his people, I am glad now he's taking on Hamas.
Do you think Joe Biden or Kamala Harris agree with any of that? How much is actually likely, Steve Harmon?
Well, all we've heard from Joe Biden so far is a statement. The reason that we heard in a very unusual situation, the vice president coming out before the president to make a statement on behalf of the United States government is because Joe Biden is on Air Force One right now on his way to Germany. Jake Sullivan did make remarks on the plane to reporters. And what the spin to some degree on this by the United States is they're taking partial credit for the death of the Hamas leader, saying that the United States has provided intelligence and technology that led to where he and other Hamas leaders have been hiding. Again, we're so close to the election now, 19 days. There's going to be a lot on people's minds between now and Election Day. We don't know what else will happen in Israel between now and then.
This isn't the first time, though, is it, Steve, that Kamala Harris has deputized in this way for Joe Biden, something she would never have done before becoming the next Democrat presidential nominee. And this is about messaging, isn't it? This is about the American people seeing Kamala Harris give presidential statements, presidential-style statements.
Absolutely. President Biden is essentially a lame duck leader at this point. And to get Vice President Kamala Harris out there with the podium, the seal of the vice president in front, and the flags, which is what they hastily arranged for her in Milwaukee today, really talks to this need by the campaign to show her as a leader.
Okay, all right. When we come back, we will dig into the latest on the campaign trail. We're in the middle of our US election watches. We'll find out strategically where each of our guests thinks our candidates are. The polls are still closed. There's a few things to discuss there. But we've also heard an awful lot. We saw Kamala Harris do that huge media blitz last week, and that's continued this week. That Fox News interview that aired late last night. Donald Trump has been having his say, trying to appeal to different sections of voters, different backgrounds of voters. So we'll dig into this in a few short moments. We're with Steve Harmon, Chief National Correspondent for Voice of America, Bobby Eberle, Republican strategist, and Joanna Maska, former White House aide to Barack Obama. More from us in a minute.
The Evening Edition on Times Radio.
Thanks so much for being with us. We are in the middle of our US election watchers section. We've exited the campaign trail to some extent to discuss the death confirmed today of Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, the person who orchestrated and put the planning into the October 7th terror attack, the massacre, of course, of Israeli citizens, which has, sparked that huge, wider Middle East war. We're going to return to domestic matters in the US now and start with Kamala Harris, the vice president and Democrat candidate for president, of course. She had an interview with Fox News. It aired last night. To give you a flavour of how it went, let's hear what she said about being a continuity candidate.
Let me be very clear. My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency. And like every new president that comes in to office, I will bring my life experiences, my professional experiences, and fresh and new ideas. I represent a new generation of leadership.
And later she was, well, evasive on immigration after a question by the host, Brett Baier.
How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but
right
do you,
now,
just a number. Do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point.
She and host Baier jostled a little bit too.
First bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the... Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please?
But
you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate,
I'm
and
in
they
the
didn't bring up
middle
that
of
bill.
responding to the point you're raising,
Okay.
and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
And there you go. You can pick a specific issue or two, or just tell me overall, actually, first of all, whether this performance would have convinced any Kamala curious, undecided Fox News viewers. That was the purpose of it, Joanna Masker.
Yeah. And she reminded American voters that Donald Trump is not supported by most of the people who worked with him in his first term, including his former defense secretary, who has been saying that he's dangerous. That is what will confirm for many of those voters who are worried about him in the aftermath of him leaving office in disgrace. They worry about that. They worry about whether he's going to be more of an authoritarian, which he has promised, or whether he's going to be a Democrat, lowercase d, stand for democracy. So that is what she wanted to remind those voters, many of them women, who are on the fence this election. The immigration debate, look, I know Brett Baier, and I think he's a thoughtful person. I wish that we could have a thoughtful conversation on immigration because we haven't had immigration reform in my entire adult life, in the entire time I've been in politics, and we need that. That was not the conversation that Brett Baier brought to the table. He brought up a few people who tragically have been killed by undocumented immigrants who are in the country. The fact that we have so many undocumented immigrants in America, that has been since President Bush. I mean, we've been trying to bring people out of the shadows. So that's a bigger conversation. Unfortunately, Fox didn't seem to want to have that. They wanted to get some gotcha questions. They probably did what they wanted to. But Kamala Harris was effective.
To be fair, well, actually, look, rather than me come back against that, I can hear you, Bobby Eberle. Come on in.
I'd love to jump in on that
because,
I mean, the whole premise was just wrong on that because what is driving the polls, what is the concern among Americans is the border crisis. The fact that we had this secure border, we had illegal immigration way, way down. Biden and Harris come in and reverse executive orders, and we have a flood. We have an estimated 10 to 20 million that have come over illegally in this country. And when you talk about people doing bad things, statistics just came out last month saying there are 13 to 15,000 convicted murderers let loose in this country. So the vetting process is clearly not there. And this is a huge problem. And it is a problem that is driving people to the Republican Party. They opened up the borders. They wouldn't admit it. Every time you took our Homeland Security Secretary or Joe Biden or Kamala Harris and put the microphone in front of them, they say there's no crisis at the border. Everything is fine until we get about 3 months before the election. And all of a sudden, hey, we got to do something. We need to change course because it is clearly important to the American people.
Steve, you can pick up on that. Steve Harmon of Voice of America, or we can talk more broadly about how Kamala Harris went down with Fox News viewers. Her camp were pretty happy, I understand. But the most important thing here, what about any undecided voters watching that?
Well, I didn't see much from undecided voters on social media, I'll tell you that. Every Republican that I saw was saying, Brett Baier cleaned the floor with her. And then all the Democrats I saw and the surrogates for Kamala Harris were saying it was an incredible interview and she did very, very well. I'm a journalist. in covering this campaign, any time that a candidate is out there giving interviews, especially live and unedited, it's a good thing for the American public. Does this change any minds? How many undecided voters are really out there at this point? A lot of people have already voted. I don't know, but the fact that she went on Fox News, I think, shows that she does have some guts at a time where they can contrast it to Donald Trump, who didn't do the 60 Minutes interview on CBS, just canceled on an interview with both CNBC and NBC, I believe. So, maybe they score, a few points there, but I don't think it makes much difference in the end.
All right. Well, Donald Trump's indicated that he's going to appear on the Joe Rogan Experience, #1 podcast in America, boasts a heavy male audience. This is, I just wonder how strong a political move this is. Kamala Harris also rumoured to be going on the same podcast as well. What are they both going to get from that? I thought it was women voters that Donald Trump needed to appeal to, and Kamala Harris, she just needs to let voters know who she is more.
At this point, it's all about getting out the vote. I don't think it's about changing minds. It's about rallying your base. So for Donald Trump, obviously, he's doing very well with males. Kamala Harris is doing really well with females, and she's been doing a lot of female-oriented interviews. These podcasts are enormously influential. And for Joe Rogan to have both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump separately on his show would be very influential, probably more than perhaps a 60 Minutes interview at this point. Okay. And Joe Rogan has made comments that are a little bit sympathetic to Kamala Harris as well, and has criticized to some degree Donald Trump in the past. So it could be really, really interesting. But what we're seeing now is these candidates both reaching out beyond traditional journalism. Obviously, New York Times, 60 Minutes, CBS, Wall Street Journal, Ecosphere is the traditional media. But for these younger, and especially the undecided or voters that tend to be more flexible, they're probably getting their news and information from social media and podcasts, not from the traditional broadcast networks or the New York Times.
Yeah, so, looking at what's happening to the polling for both candidates, and I'll ask Joanna and Bobby to have a kind of a final word on this very, very briefly, because we're quickly running out of time. A new poll has revealed that Kamala Harris continues to lead Donald Trump among black likely voters in battleground states. That's one bit of data that we've had through. We know, of course, that commentators are saying that black men, particularly young black men, are increasingly turning to Donald Trump. Latino voters as well. So Democrat groups are focused on persuading Latino voters. There's a big new $2.7 million digital campaign targeting YouTube as we talk about alternative methods of getting the message out there. Joanna, tell me where Kamala Harris needs to focus her efforts, and then Bobby will do the same for you and Donald Trump. And if I can give you sort of 45 seconds a minute each, that would be massively appreciated. Joanna.
We talk about polls until we have actual data on voters and what they're doing. And I'll say in Pennsylvania, where we actually know how many Democrats and how many Republicans have returned their early vote ballots, Democrats are ahead. That matters. I do think that Donald Trump
that is typical, though, isn't it? For early voting?
It has to be, yes, because Democrats normally return their ballots at a higher pace. But I would say we will build that wall of significant voters, and what we need to get is at least 300,000 ahead of the Republicans. You're seeing that. You're seeing Democrats actually do the job. Democrats are united. Meanwhile, you've got Republicans divided. I mean, hear what Karl Rove is saying.
Forget about the Republicans. It will be trouble, question was just who Kamala Harris needs to focus on. Bobby, to you as well. 45 seconds, 50 seconds. Who does Donald Trump need to appeal to now?
I'll echo a little bit what Steve said. It's all about getting out the vote now. And so he took his time with and had a women's town hall to try and solidify that percentage that he can get. There's a gender gap. He attracts more men. She attracts more women. But right now, it's get out the vote efforts in those battleground states. And every trend has been in the president's direction in those key battlegrounds. The turnout, I think you saw in Georgia, not with mail-in, but with at the polls, is very significant. I think the energy is there, and he just needs to motivate. Go on the podcast, keep doing his rallies, and motivate people to actually come out to vote, because if the last few years showed anything, it shows that every vote counts, and we need people out at the polls.
All right, listen, I will leave it there. It absolutely whizzed by in record time this evening. Thank you so much for your opinions, guys, and your experience on this. Steve Harmon, Chief National Correspondent for Voice of America. Bobby Eberle, Republican strategist and chairman of Fort Bend County Republican Party in Texas. Thank you to you, Bobby. And Joanna Maska, former White House aide to President Barack Obama. Thank you.